Hello, Leapers, fellow travelers. Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm your host, Sam. As many of you have no doubt already heard or seen the news, we lost an incredibly important human being to this quantum leap fandom. But before I go any further, and most importantly of all, a 7-year-old boy lost his father, and Sharon lost her partner. Matt Dale left us far, far, far too soon on Christmas Day. I am filled with overwhelming heartbreak for his entire family and his close friends, the entire Quantum Leap podcast team. It doesn't seem real, and I have gone back and forth between shock and sadness and the desire to do something. And so, with the blessing of the Quantum Leap podcast, which I thank them for immensely, I'm going to do what I hope and think I know how to do, which is talk to you, to whoever's listening, about Matt and this community, and believe it or not, this show and the people who make it. Because the side effect of this devastating loss, and it is a small thing in the midst of that immeasurable absence, is that we are reminded just how special Matt was by the outpouring of love and kindness and generosity from people that knew him very well, that knew him just a little, that knew him barely at all, or that didn't know him, just knew of him, just heard his voice or saw his face on a podcast. I literally would not be here doing this if it were not for Matt Dale, which might sound like a no-brainer because obviously I wouldn't be talking about him if he weren't gone, but I wouldn't be here on this podcast if it wasn't for Matt. Longtime listeners of the show, even not so longtime listeners of the show, because Matt was just on the show a couple of months ago, a month ago. It was only like a month ago. And as you've heard, my former co-host and co-creator of Fate's Wide Wheel, Dennis, gave me Matt's book as a wedding gift when Jessica and I got married. And he told me not to open it until I got back from the honeymoon. And I did. And it was Matt's book, Beyond the Mirror Image. And it was very shortly after that Dennis asked if I wanted to do a podcast. And I said, yes, I do. I had wanted to for a while. I'd literally been thinking for almost a year about how to make that happen. I'd had some really lovely advice from a man who goes by the name of Yoshi, who's a podcaster for a time on the Transmissions podcast, which is a Transformers podcast. And I met him at a Transformers convention in, I believe, October of 2016. And Yoshi gave me some really good advice. And it was advice that I tried to follow about finding, what moves you and not paying attention to what people try to tell you to do or what not to do, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was something that I had wanted to do for a while. And then Dennis gave me this book, and then Dennis asked the question, and I said yes. And we started this journey. And I'm so grateful to Dennis for that. And I love that book. I dove into that book. I was just blown away by it. And it wasn't too long after that we got the chance to talk to Matt and interview Matt. And Matt was lovely and wonderful and enthusiastic. And Dennis and I immediately wanted to ask him to join the show and be a co-host on the podcast. And before we had the chance, he had already started working with QLP. And it was lovely because it actually made the sense of competition or rivalry or whatever seem absolutely less so. They'd been around for a while anyway. We were clearly the new kids on the block and just trying to figure all this out and hoping 50 people would listen to us, And I'll never forget in that first interview with Matt, we were on video and Matt could see behind me, and this was in my old condo. And behind me was that bookshelf with all those Doctor Who DVDs, but it was farther away, and it was actually to the side, so it was like this to the screen, so you could barely see it. But he saw those telltale, gray spines. and he was like, we were getting ready to go, and he goes, "I'm sorry, I just have to ask, Sam, is that a complete collection of Doctor Who DVDs?" Yes. And so we connected over that. And we continued to talk and chat every now and again, but not, I never wanted to be intrusive, especially because he was on the other podcast. I didn't want it to seem like I don't know. It really, really, really wasn't up until about 2 years ago, in spite of knowing him now for like 5 years, basically, and being Facebook friends and having exchanged some messages here and there and that sort of thing. But 2 years ago, it really all changed, almost 2 years ago. That's when I was sent the pilot script for the new Quantum Leap. And I can say with a good deal of confidence, I was one of the first people outside of that studio to have a copy of it. And I got very lucky. And I'm sure the person who sent it to me could lose their job. But it was sent to me. And I shared it with Dennis right away. And we geeked out over it and we talked about it. And we were just thrilled. And we were like, what do we do? How do we handle this? And one of the first things that we both agreed on was that we needed to share it with Matt. And I was a little like, I had a little bit of trepidation because I was like, okay, like I should definitely do this. I need to share it with Matt. Like, we're going to do this, but I don't want anybody to get in trouble, but we can trust Matt. It'll be okay. And if anybody should have this, it should be Matt. Like, Matt should have this. And he was at the Gallifrey convention on the West Coast. And I told him I had it. And he couldn't believe it. And I sent it to him while he was in the airport getting ready to get on a plane. And he was so excited. And he was like, I'll read it and I'll let you know, I'll read it on the plane. And so that was February of 2022. And I can say with a great deal of confidence that Dennis, Matt, and myself were the first people to have that outside of the people working on the show, or adjacent to it anyway. And Matt didn't tell anyone he had it. He didn't share it. He kept the secret. And we started talking more and more and more about what we hoped for the show, what we were thinking for the show. And Matt was just incredible. I mean, to illustrate how much of a loss this is just to the community alone and the fandom alone, is before anybody, he was able to figure out who cast members were going to be by who was friending Raymond Lee on Instagram. He knew Mason Alexander Park was playing Ian before they'd been announced, just because Mason had friended Ray on Instagram, and he was able to deduce that. And he had his Quantum Leap info page, and he was updating it all the time. And, you know, I was getting new information and I was sending it to him, and he was putting it on the page, and he was so gracious, and to be able to collaborate with him and this exciting new thing. And then to be able to have him on the show again and talk about the second edition of Beyond the Mirror Image, and knowing that it was going to be multiple volumes, and the sense of validation when he asked to use Fate's Wide Wheel, and when he asked if he could have copies of all of our episodes that Dennis and I had worked so hard on, and sending him 97, I believe, MP3 files, sharing them with him in a Google Drive so that he could listen to them and include any new information, our thoughts, our perspectives, etc., in the new book, which is right next to me right now because it pretty much always is. The first edition is right over there. To Sam, once more into the leap, dear friend. Matt Dale from the year 2023. Number 60 of 180. And and those first few months when the show started airing were hard. You know, it was Dennis and I are trying to figure out, like, how do we do this? How do we cover a show that's on the air? How do we talk to people? How do we find people? What do we, how does this work? And, QLP, they knew. And Matt knew. Matt was able to get that together and get interviews with people, and and then we got the screener access, and then people started talking to us, and it was incredible. And it was tough sometimes not to feel jealous or not understand why we might not be getting some of the stuff that they were. And then I talked to Matt, and I remember I was in my in-laws' kitchen, and I was talking with Matt on the phone, messaging him, and we just let it all out pretty much, and about how silly it was, and about how it's not a competition and there's no rivalry, and about how much he appreciated the work that we were doing, and about how much I appreciated him, and about how I was so happy to see all the success that they were having, and and how much of a joy it was to see the interviews that they were doing, and how I knew it was a thrill for him. And then, we started getting stuff, and, we were getting interviews that they weren't getting, and how excited he was to see those interviews because they weren't the same interviews that they were having. And it was like, they were interviewing these people, and then we would interview these people. And it was just like all that sense of any sort of petty jealousy or rivalry or competition just evaporated. And instead it became the opportunity to just truly celebrate one another's successes, and to celebrate the fact that we were both getting to do this thing with this thing that we loved. And then the wind down to last season came, and then this summer came, and then Dennis told me he was leaving the show, and that, he felt like I didn't want him to be involved anymore, that I didn't want him to be a part of the show, that I'd been treating it like it was my show. And I was so hurt, and I was so sad, and I was so frustrated, and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I didn't really want to say anything to anybody, and I was having difficulty communicating it to anyone, and I haven't talked about it on here at all, and I'm not going to now, and I probably never will, quite frankly, because I just don't want to. And one of the people I did end up talking to was Matt, and he and I were chatting, and it just, some stuff just came out, and I was scared, and I was frustrated, and I hadn't allowed myself to be angry, and I hadn't allowed myself to feel a lot of these things, and I just kind of let it out. And Matt was so gracious. He just said, "It sounds like you needed to say that, and I'm glad you did." And it was so supportive, and it gave space for whatever it was that I was feeling. But it was so kind, and not just to me, but to Dennis as well. It was just kind. And Matt was just so lovely. And speaking with him about the show, how excited we were for season 2, and what we thought might happen because of the strike, and knowing what we knew about the 8 episodes, and sharing the information we had up to a point, because I'm sure that there were times when I was like, okay, should I share this? I don't know if I should share this yet. I don't want to betray this confidence, but it's Matt, and I think Matt should know. And I'm sure Matt would do the same thing. I'm sure there were times when, he was like, oh, maybe I should share this. Oh, but maybe I shouldn't share this. So we would share a lot, but there'd be little things that I'm sure that we would both kind of hold back just in case. But eventually, before the season premiere aired, we were talking, and I was just feeling kind of low, and needed somebody to just share with, and I just said, Matt, I can tell you things about the season, and I'm pretty sure that you don't know, but I don't want to spoil anything. And Matt was like, I want to be spoiled. And I told him. Because he was Matt. Because he was Matt Dale, and if anybody deserved to know those things, it was Matt. And one of the silly inconsequential, small pieces of anger and frustration and sadness is he didn't even get to watch the Christmas special last night, you know? He's not going to get to see the season finale. He's not going to get to know that they're going to dedicate an episode to him. He was so excited. He was so excited when I told him about the 3-year time jump and Addison moving on and Ben being declared dead and Ben meeting someone in the leaps. And then, we saw the episode, we got the screeners, and he, one of the benefits of him being kind of, it was weird because it didn't always happen this way. Sometimes it would actually happen the reverse, but in general, the screeners would go out at a time when it was difficult for me to watch them because I was like with the kiddos or whatever, but it was perfect for him because it was like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And so he was like, ooh, I can watch these now. And so he would almost always get to watch them before I would, but we wouldn't get to talk about them until the next day because by the time I saw them, he was in bed because of the time difference. So he would send me messages and he would say like, he's like, I've seen it. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Let me know when you've seen it. And I would send him, the message back and say like, I've seen it. And there was this kerfluffle with the access to the account at one point, and Matt made sure that I didn't have to worry about not being able to see the screeners. And it only happened the one time, but he made sure I had them all. And I remember for Closure Encounters, I told him that I loved Hannah and I was all in and I couldn't wait to see where this was going. And I thought she was just lovely and perfect. And Matt was like, I don't know, I'm not sold yet. I was like, Matt, what are you talking about? This is amazing. And then I'll never forget Secret History, Drew Lindo's episode, Secret History aired, or we got the screener for that. And Matt, sent me a message and he was like, I'm all in. And I was just like, yes. And, I had him on the show again to talk more about the Kickstarter for volume 3, Beyond the Mirror Image. And then I had him on again. We talked about Babylon 5 and we were going to talk about Doctor Who and Red Dwarf and more Quantum Leap and the book. And he'd asked me to write something for the book because he wanted to include essays from people who had contributed to the fandom in some way. And I didn't share it with him because I didn't think it was finished, and he told me not to worry, that I still had some time. I had plenty of time. And he was doing revisions for volume 2 about the revival series. And he'd sent me, and others, there's a small group of us, but he'd sent me the draft for the episodes 1 through 7. And he'd asked me, he said this is where he needed me to do the heavy lifting, because of the interviews that we had done and how much he felt I knew about the revival series and how we'd covered it. And we'd talked about this before, but I think the reason it's getting to me is because it's the last email he sent me. And I sent him an email back and I said, hey, my show closes this weekend and then it's Christmas, but after that I'm going to dive in, and I can't wait to see what you've written and what I can contribute. And we'd messaged a couple of times, but not much because I think he'd been sick. Um, but I remember not even 2 weeks ago, we were having one of our conversations and just sending messages back and forth, like we were, might as well have been on a phone call or something. And we had been talking about the show, of course, um, and interviews, and how fucking cool I thought it was that they had Raymond and Caitlin and then Rissa and Mason on the show all at once, and how they were going to make a thing of it, and try and do that once or twice a season. Um, that's just how I thought, how much I thought he deserved it. The opportunity to talk to these people. And I would always joke with him. Anytime he got an interview, anytime I got an interview or anything, I would just be like, oh, here's another one for the book. Here's more for the book. I'm going to make you write more. You're going to have to write more now. You're talking to so-and-so. You're going to have to write some more. Uh, and recently, we were talking about his interview with Trey Calloway, which he just recently released, who wrote A Bold Leap Forward, which is supposed to be the Sci-Fi Channel revival. And I'll never forget, he sent me the message. He was like, I'm about to do an interview and I am so jazzed for it and kind of nervous, and you're the only person that I think would understand. And I was like, who is it? And it was like Trey Calloway. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And the last thing I'd want to do at a time like this, especially when there are people that were closer to him and knew him better as friends and obviously his family. But I like to think that Matt and I really did share something in a way that was unique, that our relationship was comprised of two people who shared this love of something and this knowledge of something, and had built these relationships with people and celebrated that, and I had learned, he had that grace before I did, to celebrate that for one another. And when he told me about the interview and he told me about some of the things that were said afterwards, and he's like, I don't know when we're going to release it, I don't know when it's going to drop, but we got a lot of good stuff, and he talked about this and this, and I was just blown away. And I thought it was so cool. And then when he told me Deborah Pratt had hooked him up with the editor for Innovation Comics, who had done the Quantum Leap comic book, and about all this new information that he'd gotten as a result of that, and how excited he was for that in volume 3. The way he loved and appreciated the people that contributed to his work. And I know I know he didn't always think of it this way. And I think he would have almost been embarrassed to do that, but it was his work. It was his work, and he did it, and he did it so well. And it was such a huge contribution to this fandom. And he was a writer. I asked him one time on the show, I think, about what it felt like to be introduced as a writer, about how he didn't necessarily see himself like that, but it was true. He was, he's a writer. I was so excited for the, what will turn out to be one of the last projects that he's worked on, the Philip Hinchcliffe years, the DNA of Doctor Who from Cutaway Comics. And I remember when he told me about it, and immediately I was, I'm in. That book is going to mean so fucking much more to me now. And then I found out. That Matt Dale died. And I didn't believe it. I literally did not believe it. I thought it was a hack. I thought it was anything but real. I still want to think that it's anything but real. And I started reaching out to people. And I talked to Albie over at QLP, who's a lovely person too. And I talked to Chris and Allison. And I talked to some of the listeners of this show over on the Discord, Damon Shugamelli, a group of folks that had been a part of the Kickstarter and stuff. And I also talked to Dean and Drew and Caitlin and Deborah Pratt. So many people loved Matt. So many people are sad and angry that a 43-year-old man was taken from his 7-year-old son. That a friend, a father, a partner, a son, and so much more. How can this be real? How can I even be doing this? How can this actually be something that is happening? It does not feel like it should. Matt would likely not want me to do this. But it's one of the best ways that I can share with you his kindness and his creativity and how lovely he was. There are not many of these. There's a oolong tea bag in here. It says relax with some of Sam's favorite. And there's this lovely sticker of Sam and Al. And there's this beautiful book that he sent to a few folks. And it was a shock to receive a surprise, a beautiful surprise. It was one of the very first pieces of mail I received at my new address. And it's got some incredible stuff in it. The book means less than the gesture and the thought. And it usually sits over there on that bookshelf. And the first time I was setting up my camera, I realized it was in the shot. And I had mentioned that I wanted to do a review of it. And he said, no, I don't want that to happen because people are going to ask about it and I don't want to print anymore. So usually you can't see it, but tonight felt like it was okay to show you one of the best examples I can of his generosity and creativity and kindness. I will miss him so much. I will miss him because of the conversations about the show, about Doctor Who, about interviewing people, about getting to interview people with him. I know what a joy it was because I got to do it recently, and seeing him and Chris, the loss that I know everyone at QLP is feeling. I know a part of that. I got to work with him like that a little bit too, and he used to tell me that he didn't think he was very good at it. And then I'll never forget when he told me that he felt like he had gotten pretty good at it, and I was so proud of him and so happy for him, and agreed. It's like, yeah, Matt, you've gotten really good at it. Just at presenting in general, at being a podcaster, at being a host, like his growth and how he had just gotten so comfortable with doing it, and all the work he was able to do. And I remember the interview that he did with Dean about SOS, where he did the side-by-side script comparison, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, this is beautiful, this is what needs to be on the Blu-rays. I remember how excited he was to meet Deborah Pratt, and about how they had lunch together a couple of times. And speaking with Deborah, and off the mic, off the record, whatever, talking about Matt. and how at one point we were talking about something and couldn't remember the order of the episodes. And we both, Deborah Pratt, the woman that created the show, we both reached for this book. That's what he did. He made something that the people who make this show, who made this show, have. It's indispensable. And that seems so trite and stupid to say right now. Matt Dale was lovely. He just was simply lovely. In one of the last conversations we had, he asked me how the show was going. And it had been an interesting rehearsal process, but we were open and running. And I told him that I loved being able to just do the work and be on stage and collaborate, play, get paid a little something to do the thing you love. And I shared with him something that I hadn't shared with anybody about how I realize that I'm more masculine presenting. I look how I look. I am who I am. And I have no problem with playing gender normative or hetero characters in any way, shape, or form. And I don't want to occupy a space where there are other queer artists who, have certainly or just as deserving of that space, but that I hope that I get the chance to explore some queer roles in the future and roles that speak to me in that way. And he was so kind and supportive. And I have told him, I was like, I don't really know why I'm sharing this with you. It's just how I'm feeling right now. I remember when Dennis and I talked about mirror image. And I, gave my imagining of the ending I would have liked to have seen for Al and Sam. And an artist drew like a little comic of it. And we were blown away by it. And Matt, this is the type of guy Matt was. Matt asked me if it was okay if he used that in the book. And he was like, obviously I'll attribute it to you and everything. I was like, yeah, I mean, of course. Like, I didn't draw it, I did, and he was like, no, but I mean, you were the one that kind of thought it up. And I was like, I was touched enough that somebody drew it, much less that, Matt wanted to put it in the book. And he wanted me to read the audio for the short story for the Kickstarter stretch goal. And to think he saw me that way. Oh, I just adored Matt. I just adored him. And this sucks. And it's unfair. And it's so sad. And the only small solace to take from any of it is the kindness and generosity of so many people. People who listened to him or watched him, people who worked with him and knew him, people who had been friends, his family, people who worked on the show that he talked about. There are a lot of people hurting. because they loved Matt. I loved Matt. I did. I was so excited every time we got to talk. The last 2 times we recorded something for the podcast, let me tell you, folks, we might have stopped the record button, but we just talked and talked and talked. I want to send all my love, condolences to Sharon and Zach, his whole family, all of his close friends, the entire Quantum Leap podcast team and family. Anyone who's watching this or listening to this, his loss is immeasurable. What he meant to everyone who knew him and loved him cannot be quantified at all. What he contributed to this fandom, you could say the same about. Though next to the rest of it, it seems pretty small now. It was his work. It was what he loved. And I'm so grateful that we have it. I'm grateful to have known him. I'm grateful for the time I got to spend talking to him, for how supportive and kind he was, for the things I will keep with me. It sucks, y'all. Life is too short as it is, but this is too much. He deserved more. His family deserved more. We all deserved more, Matt. I will include the links for the GoFundMe for his family. Obviously, there are opportunities on social media to leave messages for Quantum Leap Podcast. They have shared a P.O. box where you can send things, and they will ensure that it reaches his family, as well as, they're able to share it with the world at large, if appropriate. I know that the show, the writers, the producers, the actors are going to do something special, because that's the kind of people they are, and that's what Matt meant. And take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. Stay safe out there. Hold your loved ones close. Tell them you love them. As much as you can, cherish the moments, the seconds, the minutes, the days. I will miss you, Matt. My tea's gone cold talking about you. But I will miss you. keep on leaping.